My talk this afternoon about campus climate and the Breaking Bread program begins with a story. Exactly 5 years ago, Slope Day weekend, early Sunday morning, 3:30, 4 a.m., a group of black students are walking up University Avenue after attending a party and, of course, a weekend of festivities, passing by Sigma Pi Fraternity House, the white structured building directly across from the Gothics. Walking up, 7 or 8 students just minding their own business, and they hear a thud. Boom. On the grass is a full beer bottle that somebody has just launched from the second floor, the porch, otherwise known as the beach at Sigma Pi. Of course, they were concerned. Kept walking, but boom, another bottle flies through the air. 3 of those young men in the group of black students happened to belong to Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, a black fraternity, in fact, the first black fraternity founded in the United States and coincidentally founded right here at Cornell. They walked across the grass, looked up at the porch, and said, "What the hell is going on?" And to that, somebody answered, "Come on up here, Trayvon," making reference to the murdered teenager Trayvon Martin from Florida. Well, luckily, nobody went up and nobody came down, and we avoided a major physical confrontation. But that incident quickly spread across campus. Mind you, it is Sunday morning and exams are about to start, and we have a major racial bias incident on our hand. We had a town hall meeting. We were able to contain any major fallout. And so exams went on, but a lot of feelings were very, very hurt, and it was a very intense situation. Fast forward to the fall. School is now back in session, and Sigma Pi is on some sort of restricted privileges. And we're beginning to think of what can we do to integrate them or introduce them into communities of color. So we thought about coming up with the idea of having a Breaking Bread. I pitched the ideas to both communities, and let's just say that nobody beat down my door coming to speak to me about agreeing to sign on. But by the end of the fall semester, we got both fraternities in a room for a facilitated dinner. I remember that event very well. There was a lot of tension in the room, civil but tense. And customarily what we do is have the young men take a seat and introduce themselves around the room, but we also ask that you sit next to someone that you do not know. So introductions, grab food, come back. But the real conversation begins when we move the dishes aside and begin the drill down, facilitated, hard work of engaging across difference. It was a tough conversation. The young black men in the room, Alpha Phi Alpha, were able to express their extreme displeasure and frustration with the event. The brothers of Alpha Phi Alpha talked about how they felt, how apologetic they were, and the conversation began to flow and shift. So beyond the anger and the resentment and the hostility, we begin to now talk about, gee, what do we have in common? Not so long after that, I'm getting word back that Alpha Phi Alpha is joining Sigma Pi for a barbecue. They're stopping by the fraternity house for a dinner. There's a basketball game going on, and all of a sudden we have some bonds of brotherhood forming out of what could have been an explosive, racially dangerous and hostile situation. About a year later, we have a Breaking Bread. This is about a year and a half after our first Breaking Bread. And you can see the authentic body language of these young men in the room. Okay, I managed to weasel into these pictures, but like I said, we averted a major racial meltdown, but it led to something a whole lot more significant and positive. Campus climate. Campus climate. For those of us that study here, teach, and work here in the Academy, campus climate is a hot-button topic. It absolutely is. Campus climate informs how we navigate campus, and just like that story I just told you, it also informs how we interact and engage with each other. I want to give you an insight into the Cornell community here and how our composition affects campus climate. Cornell High School racial composition. What this means is this survey was conducted 2021, the class of entering 2021, this past fall, right before they come and are seated. Freshmen fill out a survey. And these are questions that they answered about what kind of high school are you coming from? 74%, almost 3/4 of our white students, came to us from all or mostly white high schools. 1/3 of our black students and 23% of our Asian American students came to us from all or mostly people of color high schools. Neighborhood racial composition. 90%, 9 out of 10 of our white students came to us this past fall from all or nearly all white high schools, while 45% of our black students and 22% of our Asian American students came to us from all or mostly people of color schools. So what does this tell us? That a majority of students come here from homogeneous high schools and residential communities with very little experience in racially diverse environments or settings. Students of color experience campus climate differently. And after that story that I just told you about Sigma Pi and Alpha Phi Alpha, which did happen exactly 5 years ago over Slope Weekend, it may be easy for you to understand that for many students of color, campus climate can be more hostile and less inclusive than their white counterparts. So if you walked out of here right now, or let's say tomorrow, and went over to the Art Squad and did a random survey of students walking across campus and asked the undergraduates, would you go back to your high school and say, my college is a great place for students that look like me? You might not be surprised if the answers that you got factored out a lot around race. So, I'm posing the question, should we leave this to our students to figure out how to navigate this racially diverse campus, or should we as administrators and staff and faculty and leadership be providing more tools and opportunities for our students to learn how to engage across difference? In my view, higher ed is at a critical juncture. Colleges and universities are more diverse than they've ever been in our nation's history, and every year, right around now, admissions offices at PWIs, also known as predominantly white institutions, proudly tout our racial data, and every year we are more diverse than the year before. So compositional diversity is critically important to building a diverse community, but it is not the only condition that we need. It is a necessary condition, but not a sufficient condition for building a truly diverse campus. So my other question for you is, how do we leverage this marvelous, beautiful, and glorious diversity that, in my view, we have assembled, where students can learn to lead and shape and transform our nation, if not the world? What we do with our Breaking Bread program, quite simply, is to get students in a room to engage in constructive dialogue, drill down and explore difference. Breaking Bread breaks down barriers and builds bridges across diverse communities. It is wonderful and marvelous in its simplicity. But why is it so difficult to do? Because of those demographics that I just shared to you. Our students are basically coming here, and it's not just Cornell. We can generalize this data across predominantly white institutions. Basically what we do is convene a diverse group of students and pretty much just plop them on this campus and ask them to figure it out. So, a program like Breaking Bread gets students to the table of dialogue and often brotherhood. As you can see with Alpha Phi Alpha and Sigma Pi, authentic engagement led to true brotherhood, and those relationships still exist. Breaking Bread engages our students across difference, where they get a chance to explore preconceived notions, stereotypes. One wonders why we haven't thought of this before. It's a simple solution to a complex set of issues. Breaking bread. We've run about 100 of them, but I have a few favorites. This past fall, we did a breaking bread with the Cornell Democrats, Republicans, Black Students United, the South Asian Council, and members of the Latinx community. Why is this significant? We actually had some students from communities of color that did not want to get in the same room with the Cornell Republicans, don't like their politics. But what we do is we try to find what I call a coalition of the willing, people who are willing to come to the table to engage. You could be center, you could be left, you could be right, probably not extreme, but we want students to come with an open mind. Because what breaking bread does, the why of it is people come ready to engage because they know it's going to be a civilized conversation, even though it may not be one that you buy into completely. This was a remarkable conversation, and politics wasn't mentioned not once. Just this past Thursday, we did a breaking bread with Alpha Phi and students of color, some Greek. Alpha Phi, in their words, suffers from their own stereotype of the tall, blonde white girls from the Core 4 sorority. They really don't like that image, but that's how they feel people perceive them. This building of theirs dates back to the mid-1800s. In fact, one of the claims to fame is that Charlie Chaplin used to live in this building at 411 Thurston Avenue with a lot of rich history. And so you have students walking in, first-gen, low-income students of color who are not used to going into structures like this. Alpha Phi welcomed us in for a deep and thorough conversation about a documentary, Agents of Change, which explores student activism in the 1960s, and it starts out in San Francisco with a strike that went on in San Francisco State for 4 months. But we easily cross the country and come right here to Cornell, where Black students took over Willard Straight Hall in the spring of 1969. It's really interesting to see this conversation of students, different sides of racial groups. Some white students didn't even know about the takeover. Others had images of, thug-looking Black students walking out with rifles hoisted over their hands, over their heads, excuse me. So we were able to have a really authentic conversation about race, class, gender difference. Before I go, I'd like to tell you what really drives me to do this work. I am a Cornellian. I got here in the fall of 1970 when the zeitgeist, the spirit on this campus was very racially polarized. Downright ugly, as I recall it. We were socialized into racial groups, us versus them, or if you weren't with us, you were against us. I had a great Cornell experience, and yes, that's me, second from the left, with all that hair. I wish it would grow that long again. I made lifelong friends here, great friends here. But always in the back of my mind, I knew that something was missing because we were, like I said, socialized into racial groups. I didn't know any white students when I was at Cornell, and I had a great group of friends, and they are still my closest friends to this day. Years later, I would meet my white classmates in the early 2000s and get to know them and develop the kind of authentic relationships that students tend to do in these breaking breads. And all of us realized that we missed something very fundamental and very foundational in our experience. So, as I close out, the key to what we are trying to do is to get our students to engage across difference. We want to embed, to weave this experience into your Cornell experience, not as an add-on, but as a part of your lived experience here, where the norms and values of our community are to engage, to learn across diverse communities, to break down barriers, to build bridges. And as a baby boomer and honorary millennial, I often refer to millennials as Generation next. Generation next. So Generation Next, your time is now to help us keep building a vision of a diverse community that knows how to engage across difference and embrace difference, not because it's the thing to do or the superficial. We want you to embrace, engage, and go out and change the world. Thank you.